COVID happened, we all went remote, and then we realized that this isn't such a bad way to manage. In this video, we're going to give you some key things that you can use to make your remote management style successful. And if you stick with us to the end, we're going to give you resources you can implement now. Hey, welcome back to Blunt Force Business. I am Brian LaFauci.
And I'm Patrick Marino.
And today we are talking about remote management. We've all found ourselves in remote management now. Almost everybody has found themselves in some fashion of remote management over the last couple of years. And it looks like the future is going to go in that direction.
And there's a lot of managers trying to tell their businesses and their employees to come back. But I think that's more of like a big corporate thing. I think most companies have had to keep some sort of level of remote because they don't have the flexibility with talent to say everybody's got to come back. Especially, I mean, our audience is primarily smaller businesses. Anyway.
Right. And even the larger companies I know about who had employees come back, it was not 5 days a week.
Right.
It wasn't.
Yep.
So let's jump into our Blunt Force facts for today. All right. Blunt Force fact number 1 for remote management is remote doesn't have to mean distant.
Yeah, so there's going to be some strategies we walk you through here that'll help you maintain a close relationship with people even though they're not in the same room.
Awesome. Blunt Force fact number 2, out of sight, but top of mind.
You have to find ways as, you know, if you were in an office setting, you'd be around, right? In the remote setting, you're not physically around. So you have to find ways to be around if you're going to be a manager because people need to feel like they're accountable to something, that they have somebody to report to. And without that, you can definitely have challenges. So you have to find ways to stay relevant as a manager, even that remote environment.
Awesome. And Blunt Force fact number 3 is tech troubles translate to team troubles.
The easiest way for this all to break down if this shit don't work, right? Yeah.
It's true.
You set up, you know, whatever technology you use, whether it's Teams, Zoom, whatever it is, you know, when you're constantly having troubles, and we've all probably had them, then that can really result in just people not feeling good about the situation. So, or feeling or wasting time. So you got to make sure you get that all nailed down and do the best you can with that.
You know, sticking to that point for right now, I think let's continue on with that because infrastructure in your company, and let's take our listeners who maybe are a couple of years in business or starting out or doing whatever, right, in the early stages. Up until a couple of years ago, if you laid out like the structure of your company, it was based on a kind of a tradition of decades of, well, we have a company and this is everything we do. We go to a space to meet. We did right. It just based on all these assumptions, for lack of a better word, of how it works. And what happened over time is all those assumptions feed into other things that businesses just naturally do. A lot of people don't know, like, it's like knowing history. So a lot of this is if you know, take history as a general topic. If you know history well, you can like identify like, oh yeah, well, we do that because back in 1940, this thing happened and we just adopted it and now we do it. So when most people step into a corporate environment or most people build their business out, they do it on a preconceived notion of this is the experience I've always had. But now with remote management being so prevalent, it's really important to restructure how we build out our company, both from like when we do a initial projection. How many people are putting into their initial projection, like, all right, well, a lot of this is going to be remote, so we need a strong investment in the tech piece, in the back end build out so that this can be, to go to the first Blunt Force fact, feel close and personal while being remote, but also be effective. You have
to be effective when you communicate.
Yeah, be effective and efficient. Try to put those two words together. It's affectionate. Both be affectionate and work. And I work with a lot of startups, and a lot of them are not coming to the table with that and not realizing that out the gate. Like, hey, we're in a different environment now, and you need to be accounting right out the gate that it's more than likely going to have remote component to it. And if you're not building that out financially, you're going to run into trouble. And it's going to affect everything because it's just a different way of setting up structure. Bottom line, setting up infrastructure. And a lot of companies aren't investing in the right infrastructure, so it can be really. And I feel like we experienced this with our podcast. I feel like we did it the way a lot of companies are managing their remote management, which is fuck around and find out, right? Like, let's fuck around with it. And then we're like, well, that didn't work. So it set us back a little bit, right? And we didn't really approach this holistically the way I would say, right? The best way to do it would have been like build it all from the ground up with a lot of research. We had some basic research. We found flaws. We adapted. This wasn't our main revenue stream, so it's a little more acceptable.
It's part of that. And also the parts that didn't work really weren't necessarily even the product, which is what we talk about a lot of the time. I feel like our product, which is our weekly call, that's pretty much been functional right out of the gate. You know, it's been more like the ancillary stuff we've been kind of fiddling around. But you're right. I mean, I don't really think about it that way. I didn't really think about it that way because I'm not working as much as I used to in the entrepreneurial, like just startup space. But yeah, I mean, like if you are preparing today and you want to have any kind of plan for scale, you're adding talent. Talent is demanding remote now, even if it's hybrid. They're demanding some level of flexibility and remote. And you also want to have, like, this is like, we kind of talked about this with schools. It's like, once you kind of have done the setup for having a remote environment, then like there's more flexibility if something goes wrong. So like maybe it's not even just you're going to have a remote all the time plan. Maybe it's just a if needed plan. You know what I mean? Like maybe it's just like the snow day plan rather than having the company grind to a halt because, you know, Susie's daughter is sick or because there's a snow day and we can't get to the office. Having a good remote plan would help us continue to be productive that day instead of losing out on that day. You know?
I'm laughing because the dog is mutilating whatever toy she just got, like murdering the toy right now.
We don't have a contingency for the dog destroying the
fact
plant.
that the dog was going to absolutely murder the toy we just gave her. Like I can tell how excited she is. She's going to come up with it and be like, "Dad, I fucking killed this thing dead." Like it's a bunny. I'll tell you the bunny story later. Great bunny story. But to your point, even if it's part of the day, right? Like part of the day that is going to be remote. It doesn't matter because it's such an integral piece of work now as an entrepreneur that if you don't get it right, you look unprofessional. Like you don't look good. We're booking so much more business in that fashion. Are we still going out on the road? Absolutely, we're still doing that. But our customers are really accustomed. Our customers are accustomed to that kind of like setup, so they accept it. So we do it more, we book more things like that. And if it's not set up right, we can lose business because we're just going to naturally default to it. We're not going to think, well, that system isn't set up. You know, we're not going to think that. We're going to go to, well, everyone's doing it now, but did we build the back end out correctly?
Sure. Let's try and dial it back now to kind of what's going on in our offices, right? Because obviously we're talking about being professional on an outward basis. Mm-hmm. But I think really what people are focused on for this particular episode is kind of like, okay, now you're in that structure. You've got that structure all laid out. We've got remote workers either now or in the future or as a contingency. You know, what are some of the big challenges that come with that? And I know I've worked with a couple of companies. One of the companies I worked with was 100% remote. So nobody was in person. Right. And these were challenges we dealt with. And a lot of the people, I think, some of these challenges will resonate. You know, one of them is really just the basic human interaction of the difference between being in front of a screen and being in person. And I think there's an impersonal part to that no matter what. Like even like you and I, right? We had our strategic meeting the other day.
Yep.
And what was my...
Yeah, your comment was you didn't love the fact that we were remote.
Yeah, I was like, if we're going to be something important, I feel like we should do it in person.
Yeah.
And that's because I feel the difference.
Right.
I treat my remote interactions less seriously than I treat my in-person interactions, whether that's good or not. And again, like the more your environment is dependent on remote, the less you can do that. But I think there's something in me psychologically
Yeah.
and probably in other people psychologically,
Yeah.
that is putting less weight on the remote meeting than on the in-person meeting when the in-person is possible. Now we're talking about environments here where the in-person might even be impossible because you're distributed or because you've agreed to with the talent that they're going to be remote, right? But the challenge is the remote for most people is not as good.
Well,
right?
and let's just also talk. Because I like where you're going with this. So, because we're talking about communication.
Yep.
So, can we weave into that the fact of let's just examine a scenario. What's the last job or endeavor you're in where everybody was together face to face in every time you went into the work environment?
For me, it's been a very 25 years.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I haven't really been in that sort of environment. I mean, because even when I was doing, I had my own business. Well, I guess not. That's not true. I was working with two very, very small companies where everybody's. So I'm lying. I'm lying about that.
All right. So
it's about like I'm thinking like okay. So we're thinking about like maybe like. So in my last two, before I started my job, before I started my business, the last two companies I worked for were very, very small. So the chances of everybody being together were small in my role. They were not very.
But would you go into an office?
Yeah.
Okay. So just think about that then.
5 or 6 years ago, 7 years ago.
Okay, right. So for me, the most recent was when we had our sport complex. I was in the building.
Yeah.
Like my office was in the building. So let's now play a scenario out. I got something really quick. I want to just run by my. Like, it's quick. I don't want to have a 30-minute conversation, but I want to run it by my operations director. How do I do that?
You walk
me
over
through
and
it.
you talk to him.
Okay, so So I walk over, have face to face. He can read my facial emotions. He get right do all that. Okay, now let's take that same scenario in a fully remote work environment. How am I communicating that quick thing?
Yeah, you're slacking them. You're sending
Maybe
them a Slack message,
yep.
and then you're saying, "Hey, I need you.
Yep.
Do you have? I need 30 seconds as soon as possible, or in the next 15 minutes. What do you got in your calendar? Or you're looking at the person's calendar,
Right.
If you've got if you're organized that way, and you're choosing a spot where they're going to be available, they don't have meetings, that kind of thing.
So what inevitably do we consistently lose? And I think there's ways to overcome this, but we got to recognize it. What do we consistently lose with this remote environment?
I mean, so much the eye to eye, the flexibility. I think flexibility is big. Flexibility is big. The eye to eye contact, which we've talked about, probably not in our business podcast. We talked about in our fatherhood podcast how important eye contact is. I mean, to me, the number one thing in that scenario is flexibility.
Yeah, and I like to me it's the eye to eye contact and ability to communicate nonverbals, or to really impress upon someone like, hey, listen, this is really important. Or let me walk you over and show you exactly what I mean. Right. So there's
And what to your point, like in the Zoom environment, every interaction would probably look almost exactly the same, no matter what weight that had.
Right.
Whereas in the in-person environment, you're standing up, you're sitting down. It's how, maybe you're at lunch, you know what I mean? Like there's a whole bunch of different environments that could occur in, and each one of those environments could convey a different level of either importance or how you feel about the situation. Whatever. Whereas in the Zoom environment, every environment's exactly the same.
right.
Right.
And I think we need to just recognize the fact that we are losing opportunity to convey things with all the other nonverbal and environmental pieces to them present frequently, probably 70-80% of the time. So how do you overcome that gap? And I think that goes back to your third blunt force fact is you got to utilize the technology as much as possible, and as much as it might be, they're inconvenient. Or the reality is, the more video time and face-to-face time you can get remotely, the more you're going to feel connected.
Right.
The less time when you're defaulting back to more and more and more, we're just, and this is the balance that you talk about with meetings. Could a meeting be an email? So sometimes we got to leverage that way.
Yeah.
But now with a remote work environment, we also have to be mindful of the fact that we need to balance out creating these face-to-face interactions and getting to see someone and understand them and all that shit.
Yeah, and I think that where it really comes into play, the additional challenges, which are, you're talking about a one-on-one environment. Just talk about, just like, even I'm thinking about the really kind of last full-time gig I had, where we would be in the same room together, the four of us, and it did feel like it was a team. And and the distributed environment, it's really hard to have that.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's really hard to have that feeling of team because, you know, again, you're not seeing each other. Like, what would be the things, you know, same environment, you know what I mean? Like, it's the quickly you walk by each other and say hi. There are a lot of challenges to the in-person too. Like, one of the big challenges is if you have something to do and then three people are near your desk and you start talking about something that is completely unrelated to your task. Right. So that doesn't happen in the remote environment as often.
Right.
But in the remote environment, that's impossible. And those are little things that lead to a stronger team sometimes. Is that familiarity, that cohesion, that a lot of the nonverbal stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the friendships that would have developed. I mean, I remember back when I was younger, when I, you know, probably or even like, I mean, I worked in a bigger company where we weren't remote, but we were all in different regions.
Yep.
And then you'd come together and see each other. Those were always pretty special because you'd kind of put a face to the name a little bit. You'd kind of have that opportunity to interact. You talk about things that aren't related to work. You know what I mean? How's your kids? When was the last time you did this? And those things are very, very difficult in the remote environment.
Yeah.
You know, if not almost impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, because then you almost have to force them. Like, all right, we're going to have connection time, right?
Well, that's
like,
what we're going to, when we talk about the solutions, is going to be one of the solutions is going to be connection time, right?
Yeah, and you got to do it, right? But it's just, how do you do it, and how do you make how do you make it not seem so much like forced fun, which can be, you know.
You hear a lot of, this is like, I think, a generational thing too, because both you and I grew up in a different era because we're older. And I think that those of us who are older and have kids and have worked in traditional environments, we're like kind of okay with this stuff. It's not fantastic, but you know what? We appreciate the flexibility. We you know, if we were to trade this or a commute into the office, we'll always take this. You know, we take a couple of remote sessions versus having to be in the same place at the same time. Most of us at a certain age with kids and other responsibilities would choose the flexibility and the remoteness.
Yep.
But for the younger generation, they didn't have the experience we had. You know, these kind of younger kids who are just getting out of school, they're going straight into these remote environments, and they're missing out on all the other stuff, especially the team stuff.
Yeah.
They're missing out on the boozy freaking lunch. I had a ton of boozy lunches.
Right,
You know what I mean?
right.
It's like you go out, you know, who's coming to lunch? Oh, before you know it, there's 4 or 5 of you. One person orders a beer. And you go back to the office with a little bit of a buzz. That kind of shit just doesn't happen anymore, right?
Right. Yeah, it's much less common.
And I think a lot of the younger people are kind of missing that. I think a lot of the younger people want more of a hybrid environment, at least because maybe they just watch Friends and they're like, oh, we don't have that. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have those experiences. Or, you know, like they watch stuff like that and they're like, oh, we really want that. And you're just not having that from the remote environment.
I really relate to the comment you just brought up. I had a conversation yesterday. Yesterday was our class final for the class I teach at UConn, and had a conversation with one of the other professors there that I went to lunch with. Okay. And we were sitting down, and I'm adjunct there. So I go in, I have an office.
Professor LaFauci.
I maintain some office hours, but not a lot. So I go in 2 days a week, teach my class, some office hours, go home. You know, most of my interaction with the other faculty is high. I'm friendly with them, but I don't. So we went to lunch, which was something I try to do every once in a while, like every couple of weeks, just to maintain that relationship. But he brought up a comment. He's like, oh, yeah, we had our meeting, and then a bunch of us went out to lunch just to, like, debrief and, you know, like, have the meeting after the meeting. And I felt just like you said. I was like, like, well, that's a great time for me to build stronger relationships. And I'm not always here for those because I'm adjunct. Yeah. Being adjunct is very much like being a remote employee.
Yeah.
You're there part of the time, not all the time, right? And stuff like that. So at the end of the day, what you're talking about, I relate to because I know what you just said, I know what that's like because I've been in work situations where I've had that. A lot of the people we're bringing into work environments right now, especially our younger generation, they've never had that.
Yeah.
Everything has been more remote based.
Yeah, except for school. Like, I mean, a lot of them have come from school and then they go into the remote.
Yes, but I do think it's different. Like when you get into a work environment and you have those moments, then you realize like, oh, this is culture building.
Yeah.
Right? We're building a culture here. We're doing all these things. And then now you're not. And it's you don't know what you don't know. Lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, we may sound old in this conversation, but it's like saying, back in my day.
Yeah.
Is what it really comes down
But that's
to.
what we're
Back
doing.
in my
We're
day,
relating our experiences, right? And that's
Yes.
the whole point.
Yes.
I have like a list of things I wanted to cover, but because we just talked about that, I think it relates to what the couple of things that we've both said is when you are now in that you're missing out on these little team meetings, the
Yep.
meeting after the meeting, the
Yep.
team building. Now you feel more isolated and
Right.
disconnected.
Right.
And that is, I think, a lot of owners and entrepreneurs
Yep.
can probably relate to that the most because especially when you're starting out on your own, it's literally just you. Or, when you are, even if you have a team, you feel like you're alone because you're the only person who's really responsible and you're like the dad and they're the kids, right? And they're kind of doing their thing. They do they do the job, but you have to be the one who hires and fires and makes the decision. So that's isolating, but for the employees, it's really isolating. And I can, and those are the kids who are kind of like, and I say kids because there's a lot of times the employees are younger. They don't have to be younger. But again, for like, and I put it down to me too. Like I sometimes feel because it's my business and I'm maybe working with contractors, like I sometimes feel isolated. I mean, because sometimes I look at myself and it's like, oh, it's just been me.
Yep.
If I don't have my kid that week, it's just been me like the whole week and not
Right.
talking to anybody else.
Right.
I'm working by myself.
Right.
And like for our remote employees, that's how they feel.
Yeah.
They feel isolated. They are not socializing. So they're not flexing that social skill.
Yeah.
Right. Now, maybe they are outside, but you don't know what they're doing outside. The harder you're driving, the less they're able to flex the social muscle skill.
Yeah.
Right. The less they are in if they're not in a city, if they're in a home, the less they have the opportunity to kind of just go out and see people.
Yeah.
Right. So you're just contributing to all this isolation, and that can lead to all sorts of problems. Right. The biggest for you being the disconnection from the mission, right, which is a big part of it. But I think just the disconnect from life
Yeah.
by being remote
Yeah.
can have all sorts of challenges that maybe leads to other productivity issues for just our the human population in general, but your employees specifically.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I completely agree with all that. And I mean, I don't know if you want to get into some of these solutions now or kind of hold off a little bit.
We're going to get to the solutions, but it's up to you. If you feel like if you're in the flow and you feel like
I'm in the blunt zone.
you're in the blunt zone, brother.
I am in the blunt zone. And when I think about solutions to this, I mean, I think solutions to this are challenging.
Yeah.
To say the least. And if you don't,
That's why people are listening. They're anxious.
well, if
They're
you,
ready.
they are
for the
ready.
solutions.
They should be ready because at the end of the day, if you don't solution number one is you have to make this a priority. That's hands down solution number one. If you don't take this concept and put it on your checklist and on your weekly to-do list of like addressing and revisiting and ensuring that you have a strategic plan in place and more of an operational plan. Like we're going to do A, B, C, and D to address this, you will fail. If you make this a back of the notebook type thing, we're like, yeah, I know it's there. And you made this comment recently, just in conversation we were talking about, we've had a bunch of people on the podcast and some of the people we've had on the podcast just have this natural like ability that they're just fucking good at something, right? And then we've had other people on the podcast who it's like they may have a natural ability too, but they're systematically like they got it, right?
Right. And so it's like Michael Jordan can't teach how to play basketball.
Right.
Right. So you need
Prime
both.
example.
You need
Right.
the person who's really good at something, but then also the ability
Yes.
to convert that into somebody else.
To systematize
Yeah,
it,
exactly.
right? So for this specific thing, I'm a big believer. Solution number one is you got to systematize it. So starting with Like starting with making sure that you have a plan in place, that you are that is implemented, it's in your calendar, and you're taking the steps. What steps I think are less important than making sure you're taking these steps? Right? So how do we bridge, from a solution standpoint, how do we bridge relationship gaps? How do we bridge mission gaps? Which I think is a really important one, like making people feel part of the mission. To the blunt force fact number 2, even though we're out of sight, the mission is top of mind. And those two things can be done in a number of different ways. But solution number 1 for me is you need a system plan that, hey, whatever the X or Y is, we're doing it, we're going to have it every Friday or once a month or, in this, and you execute it.
I think that, so my challenge with the remote setting has always been the fact that you do have to address these things systematically, because if you don't, then like you made the point, right? And this is one of my blunt force facts, right? Can the meeting be an email? So you have to have good meetings, right? You rewind, watch other videos, so the meetings have to be productive. So the problem with the weekly check-in is that you have to have it in the remote environment. So like that's one of the ways you stay top of mind. Is you have it in the schedule. We're meeting every week at this time. We're meeting twice a week at this time. We're doing the whole team at this time. This team's meeting at this time. It's just freaking happening. Because you don't have the opportunity to just walk down the hall and say, hey, can we grab you guys for 5 minutes?
It's happening.
Because you can't do that. You have to systematize it. You have to have it in the calendar. So because that's a solution, the way to make that more effective is to make sure there's an agenda for every single one of those. Because otherwise people are going to feel like, and what you can't do to people in that environment is you can't cancel it every other week because there's nothing to talk about.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's like, I'm sitting around, I know I have to be at my workstation at this time because I have this check-in. They're like, I can't do it this week.
Right.
No, I just wasted, because the problem with the weekly check-in is it's not just the actual period. Unless you're like one of those where it's like, there are some people who work in these remote environments where they are busy from 8 a.m. to 4. They are literally doing something the entire time. So jumping into the check-in is not that big of a deal. But for a lot of other people who have like a lot of other responsibilities, not just in their life, but they're doing the remote thing for a flexible reason. The remote check-in means I want to make sure I'm in front of my computer for like at least 20 minutes before the meeting. I want to make sure my Zoom opens on time. I want to make sure that I'm in front of my computer. I look presentable for the check-in. And then for you to say 5 minutes before the meeting, you know what, do we really have anything to talk about? No, it's canceled. So as a leader, you've really got to make sure that you have agenda. Here's what we're going to talk about. Make that period effective. And if you are going to cancel it, you should do it with enough notice that the person you're dealing with, their flow isn't ruined and their time isn't wasted.
And with our director of content creation and marketing, Shannon, who is also the producer of our podcast, we have a standing meeting every week, and most of Shannon's role is remote. Like, when I think about the amount of time we spend together every week, it's probably about 30% of the total time that she may be doing other stuff. So a lot of it's remote, and we have that set meeting, and it's important that, and this is where one of our blunt force facts contradicts this blunt force fact, but because of a very specific dynamic, which is we always say, could that be an email? Right? Now, when we're in person all the time, we can feel like meetings can be a waste. But now we add this variable on top of it, where the variable is, this is also about team building. Right. And keeping, top of mind and things like that. And I find that with the contractors that I have as well that are working other programs, same thing. I got to meet with them every week. And it may be, all right, we don't have a ton, but you have to hear my voice. I got to hear yours. Because we're not in the same room every day. So even if it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes, we're going to talk, and we're going to do that, because that variable now takes that concept of turning a meeting into an emails to save everyone's time and saying, yeah, but this is really important.
Right.
We had the W-2 1099 debate, right? remote employees feel like a 1099 employee a lot.
Right.
They feel that way, right? Even if we're W-2ing them, they feel that way. So how do you bridge that gap? Well, we maybe have to tip the scale of, we're going to do the meeting because we need to stay front of mind, and we need to, let you know you're part of the team, and we need to do team building things, and we need to, offer things up that let you know that, hey,
I think part of these check-ins as well should be development, not just of the role, but also of the individual into maybe a future leader. Because in the remote environment, like the two old guys, we grew up in environments you could probably talk about all the different people you've had to report to over the, 25 years of your professional life, and what you've taken from each one of them.
Yep.
That's really hard. So that's made you the leader you are today.
Yeah.
So
you get to watch and see.
Yeah. So in the remote environment, you've got to think that the people who are working for you, your employees or contractors, whatever, they're the future leaders of not maybe your organization, maybe a different organization.
Yep.
So your responsibility as a leader is to develop that in them as well.
Yep.
And you have to establish these check-ins. And if you don't have something agenda driven for the business, maybe it's agenda driven for leadership development. It's like we don't have now in this remote environment where everybody's remote, we have a lack of management skill. Because you don't have that ability that you would have had to learn how to be a manager in person, right? It's a very different environment. It's hard to do. So you've got to make sure that as a leader, that you take being a leader seriously and you take developing seriously. And I think that we're developing leaders for our organization. If we have a bigger organization, or if we want to grow, and this person has leadership potential, we want to be developing that in them. So part of that's going to be training as well.
I also want to, as we're kind of getting towards the end here, there's one solution that you put down when you were outlining a lot of this that I love. And it was the last one you put, which is, adding in mental and physical health resources. And I loved it because I think we do it pretty well in our company, right? Yeah. So it's a thing that we do to promote, with creative incentives that we offer for people to take care of themselves, physically and emotionally. And so we offer things like that, hey, as part of you being, and we'll even do it with our contractors that are doing long-term contracts with us. Like, as part of you being part of the team, here's the thing that we're going to offer to you. You can use this health and wellness benefit in these spaces. How do you want to use it?
Yeah, so you do a reimbursement almost, right? you could do because it would be a common. It would be
it's just like a reimbursement.
Yeah, it would be a common business perk to have access to the gym. You could do a reimbursement.
And that's
for
what
people.
we do.
Yeah, exactly.
So we do stuff like that. So you want us to pay for a gym membership for you? Tell me where, and we'll take care of it. You want, we're doing nutrition programming right now, those people that make the meals. We'll pay X amount to have your meals made, so you're eating healthy. We do massage, but it's here's the stipend. What do you want? And if there's nothing we offer, all right, we'll have the discussion. Well, what would work for you? And it just, those sort of things can really help make people who aren't in front of you every day feel connected to the team, because when they experience that thing, which is just this thing they're experiencing outside of work, they're like, oh, I get this thing because
there's a next level of that too. You've got, I contracted with a company that does an add-on to the health insurance, and they're targeting HR managers, right?
Yep.
So when you're purchasing your, employees' health insurance benefits and packages, you can add on this mental health aspect of it, and it's like this combination of online resources, virtual practitioners who you can get in front of if you have a problem, all these different things for people who, and it could be a whole nother topic, but you've got this anxious generation of younger employees, right, and you've got these isolated people. So you've got the combination of younger people who are more anxious than maybe the previous generation, and you've got these people who have to work in isolation. So having some sort of resource where people who are literally depressed, who are, clinically anxious,
I just wrote a note because you just made me think of something I don't want to forget to relate to that. That was, I think, a very brilliant idea.
What do you want me to add on to this, or do you want me to move on to the next?
No, that's okay. This was more of a, you said something and I didn't want to forget about it for later. I like, you talk about systems. My notepad's always in front of me. So if I think of something and I don't want to forget it, it gets put down on the paper.
Well, because
right?
we are getting to the end. Let's close out with systems, because I think that there's two systems I think that are super important. Number one is clear communication tools, and number two is support for those communication tools. So clear communication tools, meaning how are you going to communicate? There needs to be a standard, and it shouldn't be, this is like the hardest thing because you're working with people who are flexible. It shouldn't just be, I text with that person, I call that person, I Slack that person. There should be like a channel. All the communication is organized. We use Slack. We use the Slack alternative. You know what I mean? Like, and that way it's professional, right? And it's organized and it's all in one place. I can refer to it,
yes.
And like there are teams set up so that we can do it in there. It should not be fly by night based on every individual. That doesn't mean you have to be flexible as a leader. Yep. And you're going to have the all-star person. You're going to have the people who are treated differently. I don't think that you can ever you're going to treat LeBron James differently than you treat his teammates, right?
Yeah.
He's going to be one of the leaders. I get that. But for the most part, you want to have exceptions, there's rules with exceptions, not just exceptions.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just a system of just everybody's different. It's here's the rule. We all use this communication channel and this is how we communicate.
Yep.
It's not email. Our email is for our outreach to our clients. Our Slack channel is for our internal communication. Right. This is how we do it. We use Zoom. We don't use a combination of Zoom and Google Meet.
Oh, it drives
and
me
Teams,
crazy when people are like, what are we
what are we on? Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You want to just FaceTime? No. We are freaking Zooming. Yeah. You can use Zoom on your phone. Whatever you choose. It's like, this is what we use, and it's clear and it's easy. And the easier it is, now you take on the flip side, which is what if something goes wrong?
Yeah.
You have to have somebody in the company who's like, the email goes down.
Right.
Here's who you go to. Slack channel is not working for you. You fall off of it. Here's
if you're
who you
relying
go to.
on it, it can't be dead for a day.
Exactly.
Yeah, it can't be dead for a day. And then having the backup system too. I like it. This is a great conversation.
Yeah.
Right. It's approaching, takeaway for our listeners. It's all about approaching the fact that this is the new work environment and approaching it systematically from the start.
Right.
And as you build your business, there needs to be a line item for this in there right out the gate, because it is the way work's done now. So it can't just be the afterthought of, we'll do it this way. Well, because it will be the way you conduct business.
And you have to be intentional, and that's a big running theme through everything we talk about. Especially the more disconnected you are physically, the more intentional you have to be. You can't just be a leader by example in a remote environment.
Right.
It's like almost impossible. You have to be an actual reach out. Here's our check-in. How you doing? Give me the update on that. Show me that show me your performance metrics. Tell me, walk me through your process and how you did that. Walk me through on what we're going to do next. The hard leadership skills are probably more important than the remote environment, because in the other environment, in the traditional environment, just by being around, showing you're walking tall, you're charismatic, you're doing, and everybody can see. The boss is doing, boss is here. Those are things that you can't do in the remote environment. Those things don't exist.
Yeah, what's the boss doing right now? Playing golf, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And you just can't. I mean, like in the physical environment, there's things that you can get away with as a leader that a remote environment you can't.
Can I add one more point before we wrap?
You can add 2 more points if you want.
If you're going to be remote as a leader, be available. That is one of the biggest things. When your people call you, you need to do everything you can to pick that phone up, because that gives a feeling of he's there, he's working, he's available, he's engaged.
Or just that if we're all flexible, like if I'm saying you can be flexible.
Yes.
I'm a remote environment because I want to be flexible. Mm-hmm. Then there has to be a channel, right? There's a calendar and a channel. Here's my availability.
Yeah.
Here's your availability. Like the most effective companies I've worked with, the calendars are crucial, because then when people where their meetings are. right? And you're like, all right, now I know I've got 15 minutes to hang in there. And either they're just automatically inserting the check-in, which I don't love, or there's just a quick little slack. Like, hey, like, you got 15 minutes right now. And as a leader, that's the availability I give, is like, hey, reach out and say, can I grab you for 15?
But you also,
and I will say yes or no, but I will say, you can't grab me for 15 right now, but at 3:00 you can.
Right.
But at whatever time you can. Tomorrow morning, first thing in the morning, let's get after it. This is important. I understand. Right. You know what I mean?
Yes. And you also know that, there's been people you've worked for, that you've had contracts with, that are just a bitch to get in touch with, and you feel disconnected from. Yep. So avoiding that. So this is great. Great conversation. Remote's the way of the future.
Remote is the way of the now.
The now, that's true. 3 blunt force facts. Blunt force fact number 1, remote doesn't mean distant. Blunt force fact number 2, out of sight but top of mind. And blunt force fact number 3, tech troubles translate to team troubles. And if I had to say that 3 times fast, it would be a disaster.
You said it better. You did that better than trying to communicate efficiently.
I'm Brian LaFauci.
Patrick Marino.
Until next time.
Thank you.